My name is State Representative Mike Sterla from Lancaster, and I chair the Democratic Policy Committee. We're here today at the request of Representative O'Meara to talk about infrastructure, and green infrastructure in particular. I'll get members to introduce themselves, and if we get joined by other members later, we'll get them introduced as we go on. So I'll start down here to my left.
Good morning, State Representative Maureen Madden. I represent Monroe County, the 115th District, otherwise known as the Poconos. And it's really a pleasure to be here and see all the flowers. We don't have those yet.
Good morning. My name is Dan Williams, representative for District 74, Chester County. It's a real pleasure to be with you this morning.
Hi, I'm Mary Isaacson. I represent the 175th District in Philadelphia County.
Good morning, everyone. I am Jennifer O'Meara. I am the state representative right here in the 165th District.
Again, Representative Mike Sterla from Lancaster.
Good morning. I'm Joe Webster. I represent portions of Montgomery County, sort of west of Norristown. It's Collegeville, Skipback, West Norriton, Upper and Lower Providence. And it's my pleasure. Thanks.
Good morning, Joe Cerisi. I'm from the 146th, Trapp to Pottstown. I'd like to have you all come out and shop in the Limerick Outlet Mall. It helps our tax base, so don't be a stranger to the Limerick community.
Thank you. We're going to get Representative O'Meara is going to have some opening remarks, and then we'll get our first panel up here. Because of the way the microphones are set up, we actually won't be doing like a panel discussion. And so normally what we'll do is we take all the testimony from a panel and then we ask questions. In the case of the first testifier, Secretary McDonald, we're actually going to let him testify. We'll ask him questions, and then he needs to hit the road, and then we'll start in with then we'll do the others as panels. So, Representative O'Meara.
Thank you, Chairman. So I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning and just explain why it was really important to me that the first hearing we had in the district was about infrastructure, in particular green infrastructure. So I've only been in office since January, but I can tell you the single largest complaint that I've received from my constituents in Radnor Township has been about our infrastructure, both stormwater flooding concerns and the state of our roads. And so it was really important to me that we had an opportunity to have a hearing where we could hear testimony from the DEP and PennDOT and other local people involved, our township manager and other people involved in infrastructure, so we could start the conversation about what is the current state of our infrastructure and what are we going to do to fix it. Because in my opinion, quality of life issues start with being able to drive and not have your car be damaged just getting to the grocery store. And so this is a really important issue to me. I know it's really important to all of you, and that's why you're here with us this morning. So thank you, and I'm going to end so we can get started. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Secretary McDonald, you're up.
Thank you very much. Is this making sure it's on? Good. First, thank you, Representative O'Meara. Thank you, Representative or Chairman Sterla and members of the committee for the opportunity to be here with you all today. When we talk about infrastructure at DEP as it relates to flooding and stormwater, there are two things that we think about. One, which we're not going to really focus on today, is the gray infrastructure. And these are projects that we're involved with where we're funding levees, dams, flood protection projects that involve cement, cement basins, places where we're redirecting water. The green infrastructure that we're talking about today is more creating more of those recharge areas, creating truly green infrastructure, wetlands, riparian buffers, streamside restoration projects that help take volume and energy out of those waters that can have such an impact on communities, as well as lead to a pollution source. The way we manage stormwater is critical for how we protect communities, and it improves the quality of our waters and rivers. Green infrastructure contributes to two major efforts that are central to DEP's mission. First, by reducing the severity and frequency of destructive flood events, and second, by reducing pollutant loading and stream channel erosion. Green infrastructure also comes with secondary benefits, like improved air quality, less extreme heat in the summertime, improved aesthetics. People prefer green, leaf-shaded sidewalks rather than bare and hot asphalt. There's an important connection to climate change as well. Pennsylvania will experience more severe storms more frequently as the climate changes, bringing lots of water into communities very quickly. We've already seen a 10% increase in precipitation in Pennsylvania. Modeling that we've looked at shows that we'll see another 8% increase between now and 2050. So this infrastructure conversation is not just important, but very timely. These storms will challenge municipalities to manage all that rainwater in ways that don't lead to flooding or to increased water pollution. An example of this is what's already being done in the city of Philadelphia. Philadelphia is an old city with an aging infrastructure, which includes what is called a combined sewer system, where pipes that manage stormwater are the same as the pipes that manage waste from our home plumbing. Heavy rains push these types of systems beyond their capacities, leading to overflows into local waterways. Philadelphia has launched Green City Clean Waters program, which uses key green infrastructure projects on both privately owned and publicly held lands to reduce the amount of rain going into storm drains. Nearly 600 projects have been put on the ground since 2011, and many more are in development. A key lesson that cities like Philadelphia, like Lancaster, and other early leaders have learned in implementing these programs is that managing stormwater with green infrastructure, as opposed to that traditional gray infrastructure, has a triple bottom line benefit. In addition to the environmental benefits of cleaner waterways and the economic benefits of reducing overall costs, saving residents money, utilizing green infrastructure provides important societal benefits as well. Remaking streetscapes with rain gardens and schoolyards with permeable pavement can add to the quality of life of residents by beautifying neighborhoods and providing new recreational opportunities. DEP is also working with other urbanized communities to manage stormwater under the municipal separate storm sewer system permit requirements. These more modern systems keep stormwater and sewer lines separate, but still present challenges to municipalities. DEP held several informational meetings for municipalities leading up to the new permits and continues to work with them to ensure compliance. Green infrastructure projects that slow down and absorb rainwater are often a critical component of meeting these permit goals. In addition, DEP has partnered with Villanova University, who's here with us today, to update Pennsylvania's Stormwater Best Management Practice Manual, which will give preference to green infrastructure approaches in managing stormwater. To be clear, stormwater, especially in urban environments, must be managed to prevent both flooding and pollution. This is something that needs to be done at the municipal level, either individually or by joining with other municipalities to form stormwater authorities. DEP generally encourages adjoining communities to work together to address stormwater requirements, because experience has shown that in many cases, a partnership approach managed by one stormwater authority can considerably lower costs compared to communities that go it alone. And as we all know and have all experienced, stormwater does not obey a political boundary. We also know that municipalities and stormwater authorities need to have the resources to be able to address these needs, especially knowing that climate change will make managing stormwater that much more difficult. Several communities have implemented stormwater fees to help pay for new infrastructure. Many more are considering these fees. While these costs may vary depending on the specifics of the project, DEP has found that the average per capita cost ranges between $11 and $18 a year in MS4 communities. DEP has some limited resources for technical guidance and even fewer options for any kind of financial assistance for these programs. Governor Wolf has outlined, though, a bold new initiative, Restore Pennsylvania, to provide resources for the types of green infrastructure projects that communities need to help manage stormwater. Green infrastructure projects funded by Restore Pennsylvania will create local jobs to construct and maintain green infrastructure that captures stormwater where it falls while also beautifying downtowns with rain gardens, parks, and streetscape improvements, making them more attractive to new residents and businesses. I'll point out, having been involved in a couple programs in Lancaster, they actually do a tour of these facilities and have a well-established tour that shows off exactly the kind of infrastructure we're talking about. Restore Pennsylvania will be structured to provide additional incentives for communities that are working collaboratively with their neighbors to tackle stormwater in the most efficient and cost-effective manner possible. On a smaller scale, Growing Greener grants have been awarded to many projects here in Southeast Pennsylvania, including projects like stormwater retention basins and stormwater projects at local parks. I'm joined here by PennDOT. I'll also talk about another kind of green infrastructure that we're in the middle of a build-out of in the environmental friendly sense, and that's electric vehicles. In January, we issued an electric vehicle roadmap to explore how Pennsylvania can take advantage of the benefits of EV adoption, including those for the environment, economy, and society. Transportation made up nearly a quarter of Pennsylvania's greenhouse gas emissions, much of that from gasoline-powered vehicles. As noted previously, climate change will have a major impact on Pennsylvania, and reducing the source of climate-related emissions is a critical part of addressing it. At DEP, we're already encouraging adoption of both electric vehicles and the necessary charging infrastructure to support them through our alternative fuel incentive grants, as well as through the Driving Pennsylvania Forward initiative, which is using funds from the Volkswagen settlement to provide grants and rebates for electric vehicle charging stations. Green infrastructure, whether it's a wetland, a rain garden, or an EV charging station, is an important factor in Pennsylvania's economy and environment in the 21st century. New projects will require serious investments, which is what makes Restore Pennsylvania so important to the future of the Commonwealth. I'd like to again thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to any questions you might have.
Thanks. I'll point out we've been joined by Representative Schusterman from Montgomery County?
Montgomery and Chester.
And Chester, okay. Questions from members? Representative Cerisi.
Thank you, Secretary. I appreciate the presentation. You've given a lot of great information. I mean, the 10% increase in precipitation, another 8 in the next 30-plus years, is really scary. And when we look at these areas that are in somewhat of a wetland area, that are close to it, and the flooding on our rivers and streams and creeks, it is a huge issue for us. Out in my area, we're facing a massive issue with an infrastructure that was put in almost 200 years ago for stormwater drains that is starting to collapse. And the town has almost been built on it. And when you talk about some of these programs and money, what are we looking at for money, and how underfunded do you feel that you are for some of these projects that we have across the state?
No, thank you for the question. So in terms of, one, that aging infrastructure, and just pointing out, I think we all know ultimately that it's going to be a combination of that gray and green infrastructure. So not sure what the specific circumstance there is, but there may be some things, we have some conversations around Penvest, for example, and some other sources. In terms of the total amount of investment required, that's something we're still getting our arms around. One of the things, when I've talked about Restore Pennsylvania in some other forums, I've pointed out, it's really in my 22 careers in 22 years of state government service, the first time I've really seen something where the scale of what's being proposed starts to match the scale of what we're up against. So looking at some portion of a $4.5 billion initiative to address these really, really challenging green infrastructure issues and start to address what's been 100, 200 years of adding to the impervious surface is important. You mentioned the wetland piece. A lot of what we've learned over the last 100 years is the more you can create spaces where that water gets energy taken out of it, that the volume can dissipate into groundwater as opposed to running down into the streams, into our rivers, bringing pollutant load and bringing that water directly into people's backyards, basements, businesses, it's absolutely critical as part of the strategy. Thank you.
Thanks. Representative O'Meara.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I have a lot of ideas, so I'm only going to ask 2 questions.
Okay.
First, you mentioned Lancaster has made a lot of improvements as well as the City of Philadelphia, but you also mentioned stormwater authorities where municipalities are joining together. Can you point me, and you can send me information later if you can't answer right now, to any specific examples of municipalities doing that in the Southeast so we can start to look at models? And if they haven't been done in the Southeast, maybe in other parts of the state, so we can look at models here in Delaware County?
Yeah, I'd have to look specifically at Southeast. The ones I know, and there's a variety of models, so just to give you even some sense of some different approaches that reach same end goal. In the case of Wyoming Valley up in the northeastern part of the state, the sanitary authority is taking on some of these responsibilities through agreements with over 30 municipalities. In York County Planning and the York County Commissioners have taken on some of this responsibility, and they're looking at formation of a new authority potentially as part of that solution. It even goes to, in Harrisburg itself, the city of Harrisburg is working with Susquehanna Township, Lower Paxton Township, just under a municipal agreement to share resources. So it can take a variety of forms in terms of how people address it. It isn't always a separate stormwater authority. It can be done in a variety of ways, but what we've seen is that cooperation can drive the cost down in half or more, depending on the circumstance.
Okay, great. And then my second question is, as there's a lot of residents here and a lot of homeowners, what can we start to do at a very micro level, but at our homes, to try to capture water into the ground and try to mitigate this problem?
Sure. So one of the things, and not even going back that long, right? I've been in my current house just under 20 years, and I can still remember when we were going through the purchase process and the inspector there looking at the gutters and saying, oh, you want to get this water as far away from the house as fast as possible as you can. And we know now, you don't want to put it into your basement, but there are other options for dealing with it. So some of the things we talk to folks about are things as simple as rain barrels instead of gutters, where you capture that water in a rain barrel coming off of your roof, attach it to a hose, you can water your garden, save the water as opposed to waste it and end up paying for it in your utility bill when you're watering your garden. Rain gardens, very small, very simple, diverting some gutters onto, if you have the ability to, some portion of the property where there is a sunken garden, basically, where you're creating your own little wetland, putting plants in there that tolerate wetter soils, things like that. The other thing I think gets lost in some of this conversation that as we're doing some of this build out, we're going to deal with and going to continue to deal with is the waste side, which is litter. We have stormwater management systems in place now that rely on gutters and things like that. When you get these flashy events, it carries everything with it. So everything that is on our roadways, is on the sides of our roads, comes out of the trash can, whatever, ends up blocking that drain and exacerbating some of these flooding situations. So all of those kind of management things, there's a variety of things you can do in your home, but those are some examples. Thank you. Yep. Yes.
You brought up something that bothered me for years, and I know it's not PennDOT's fault by any stretch of the imagination, so Ken, forgive me for what I'm about to say, but commuting on the Schuylkill and seeing those drains completely clogged after you've cleared them, because I would wait in traffic as they were clearing them, and a week later, completely blocked again. Is there any initiative, and I don't know what it would be, that we can do to help? Because we've been on the Schuylkill where it's been closed because of the last couple of years has been the worst I've ever seen because of the flooding issues that have been on there, and it's because of a lot of the trash that's hitting those drains. I mean, is there anything that new technology or anything we can look at?
Sure. So the couple of things I'd say are, one, obviously, I'll leave the maintenance side to Ken. But specifically, I mean, one really good partnership that we've had with them here recently, and it's the first time we've done it in 10 or more years, is we're in the middle of a litter survey statewide right now. To drive some better education and program development on our end to look specifically at these kinds of issues. We've also had an ongoing conversation with our solid waste advisory committee around looking at Act 101, passed in the late 80s, hasn't really been updated in the interim, and whether or not there are some things we need to be considering within the context of that, as just a couple examples of things we're looking at.
Thanks. Mr. Secretary, one of the things that as I understand, part of climate change is there's people that say, well, it's not raining more than it did before, and it's not snowing more than it did before, and it's not hotter than it was before. But when it was explained to me that it is more severe than it was before. It may still only rain, 30 inches in a year, but it used to rain in half an inch a week, and now it's raining 10 inches in one day, and then we have a drought for 4 months, and then it rains 6 inches again, and it's that severity that is the challenge here. Am I correct in that?
Absolutely, no, absolutely. It's what we're seeing, and people talk about, the question that gets asked is it the new normal? What we see is flashier events more frequently spread throughout the state. So it's if you can imagine, you have that, if you have a pile of things and there's just a drip of water coming, little bits might move and it might break down over time. When you get, when you unleash the fire hose at that same pile, all of it goes at once. So whether it's things on our farm fields, things in our municipal infrastructure, and didn't really talk about, we talked a lot about the flooding, but the pollutant loading from this, we've done a good job of getting at point source pollution, places where there's a pipe, right, discharging something. A lot of the impacts we see statewide now are agriculture, it's the stormwater infrastructure, and it's acid mine drainage, right, depending on the parts of the state you're in. So it's when you get these rain events, you get increases in nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment, other pollutants that enter our waterways.
Okay. And then could you also just touch a little bit more on the green infrastructure part of it and what I call the more passive part of it? I mean, I just looked up while we were sitting here, a tree traps 1,685 gallons of water that never hits the ground and then gets reaspirated back into the atmosphere. So if I can, for instance, in my city, if I could plant 20,000 trees, I could keep 33 million gallons of water from ever getting into that storm sewer. Do we have anything in place to say, if you're planning on anything, if you're planning any gray infrastructure, you have to prove first that green infrastructure wouldn't work for you? Because it seems to me that we've spent a whole lot of money in the past. I mean, Penvest was known for, hey, let's put a culvert in, let's do something like that. Now, they've switched over and said, we will fund some green infrastructure, but can we get it to the point where we say you have to consider green infrastructure first, and only if that doesn't, you can prove that that doesn't work, do we then go to the gray infrastructure, which sort of flushes it down the drain?
So, I'd want to get a specific answer back after talking to our folks, but for example, we don't require, I think, that kind of analysis. We do encourage and have meetings and try to figure out ways of helping various applicants through how we reduce the amount of dollars something is going to cost and whether there's better options. We have some communities where, frankly, like the flood, even putting aside the Penvest piece, we do capital projects for flood protection, flood wall, levee kinds of projects that exist. And in some cases, that's really the only way, based on the way a community is situated, that you can deal with those kind of issues. I will point out we are starting to look at things like, we're having some conversations on some of our permits about general permits in particular, we'll call superior environmental performance, right? Where if you're doing certain things, green infrastructure, native plantings, those kinds of activities, that the process is easier because we know we're, if there's a regulatory line that you're well over it based on those general permit requirements, and it requires less work on our end to deal with. The one thing struck me on your climate question, just to point out, even just, some of the practical impact kind of things we talk about internally is even if you're lengthening, say, the summer season by a month, we run programs like the West Nile, the mosquito surveillance program. We have this much money for this much surveillance. So we start looking at how do we stretch those things out to manage these things. So even little differences here, the black fly program, the West Nile program, if health was here, they would talk about heat deaths and potential increases in that and the resources needed to deal with that. There's things we're going to have to think about as government as we see these margins start to spread.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Rob Traver, Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Villanova University.
I want to thank the previous speaker for taking all my comments. I'm a director of the Water Resilience Center at Villanova University, and our oldest rain garden, before it was called Green Infrastructure, was built in 2001, so we have a lot of experience in these areas. But I wanted to address a little bit more about green infrastructure as a system and bring in the flooding aspect, because flooding is just simply ugly. I've been involved in way too many studies, walked way too many creeks and homes that were destroyed. I spent 5 years working on Katrina in New Orleans, looking at why our system of infrastructure failed so miserably. I remember, Floyd in the 90s, it took out part of Darby, basically Collegeville, near where I live. Yes, I do shop. And basically looking at flooding there in the early 90s from a snowmelt event and rainfall event and Superstorm Sandy. And after that, I worked with the American Society of Civil Engineers. We put a volunteer task force to develop recommendations on what we called flood risk mitigation. And a lot of that, now, we're not in New Orleans, we're not at sea level, we don't have gigantic pump stations taking stormwater out to the Gulf, but a lot of the recommendations, I think, are very applicable to these areas. And the first one is really to understand the problem. Sometimes we have a problem or a bad practice of just looking at the previous big storm. The next one is going to be different. So we have to take a look at the intensities and look at a variety. We have the tools. We could do 40 years of simulated rainfall, amp it up for climate change, and really understand, is it the impervious surface, is it the conveyance, is it we built in the wrong places, how all this fits together. Then we get to the green infrastructure, which I do love. And one of the things that's been very exciting working at this for a long time and working with a lot of other faculty and students in Villanova, we're learning how well it does work during major storm events. We have a site at Villanova was designed for 1 inch of rain, and Superstorm Sandy, almost no water left the site. We got up to like 4 inches of removal. That's because we're now understanding these are engineered systems. They have to be designed based upon the soils, the plants, the vegetation. You're just not popping a rain garden in anymore, which is not a bad idea for a homeowner, but for a system that's a little bit differently. The conveyance system is important. We don't want to move problems downstream, but it doesn't mean there might not be one pipe that's causing a localized problem that we can fix. And tying in, as the Secretary said, talking about the floodplain, detention, a lot of flooding, as he said, I agree with him, it's a space and time issue where you store the water as it moves through. Then after that, then the really hard part, we have to maintain these systems. We found a lot of the systems of green infrastructure get a bad rap, but it's usually not built correctly or not maintained through where everything starts growing. So sediment comes in for 6 months and they say, oh, it's not working. Well, it wasn't built right. Villanova, we're starting to use the City of Philadelphia's method. Take a fire hydrant, fill it up after it's done, the water disappears, it probably was built right. It's a very easy way of doing things. After all that, the next recommendation from this group was really looking at the regulatory approach. We need to make sure all branches of government, and there's a great example here, we got the township, we got the state, PennDOT, DEP, are working together in the regulations. We found time after time examples, not from Pennsylvania, where one community group was trying to build in an area that was at risk and would put other areas at further risk due to the construction. So the zoning, the planning, the building codes, all that really have to work together toward addressing the solution. And then after that, even the hardest part is letting people know what their risk is. We're not going to be able to and I haven't used the word protect at all, because we're talking about mitigation of risk. All right, we can reduce the risk, we can't get rid of it, so people have to know what the risk is, and we have to identify areas that we may not be able to protect as well. And those areas, then you look at resilience. What can we do to get people back in their homes quickly? What maybe the first floor, somebody was mentioning your basement being flooded out. Well, if you know that's going to happen, can we waterproof it? Can we let the people know not to put their family photos down there? And what can we do to get back in operation and keep people out of their homes during the flooding? You're not going to be able to stop it. All you're doing is putting yourself at risk. Villanova and what we do, we're very passionate, as I said, about this. We will continue through trying to advance the body of knowledge of the education and graduate good students to work on these issues. So thank you. And I'm not sure if you want me for the next panel for questions or you want to do that now.
I think we'll ask you questions before we get to the next panel.
Okay.
Before we do that, though, I neglected to mention that we've been joined by Representative Bizzarro from Erie, Representative Harkins from Erie, and Representative Matt Bradford, who chairs the Appropriations Committee from Montgomery County. Questions? Representative O'Meara.
So thank you very much for being here, and thank you for your comments and for all the work you are doing at Villanova. I have a question because I know there are some people here who work on building new developments. What would be your top 1 or 2 suggestions that people, as they're starting to build new developments, should consider when implementing green infrastructure? And I'm particularly curious, as we need to find places to park our cars, but what can we do to make parking lots, for example, work better in terms of green infrastructure?
Well, one thing I would do is, one thing we've learned is the ability of the surrounding soil to take the water below the rain garden or porous pavement is critical in operations. So we used to build the developments, and wherever the bad soil is, that's where we did the stormwater. I would really recommend looking for areas within your site that can be very inducive, because you can really reduce the cost, the maintenance, and be more effective. I'm really a big fan of the vegetated systems for all the benefits the Secretary was talking about, and we think they're more resilient. I think our maintenance of the one in Villanova, we cut down the grasses once a year and rake them out, and that's about it. And that's been operating for 17 years and no degradation of performance. Now there's weeds there, and there's trash, but it is a green systems. I do think the porous pavement systems can be effective. I think we need to be smart about putting it. Put it in the parking area, not the travel way. Put it in the area where nobody's going to be parking, or banks. Nobody goes to banks anymore, right? We got a lot of green, a lot of places for that. But it also has to be maintained. These are engineered systems, so you need to get a vacuum street sweeper with enough power to do it. You're not going to put a porous pavement through a trail in the woods because you can't maintain it. You got plenty of place for nature to take care of the water. So that's kind of my approach.
Thank you.
Representative Cerisi.
So it's funny, Jen, I had almost a similar question, and seeing a couple of builders who are here, and you talk about, where we are out in Collegeville, Limerick, it grew like mushrooms out of the blue. They developed every piece of land and still developing it. But with that comes the responsibility of runoff, stormwater, and you'll hear from the residents who've been there a long time, my yard now floods after they put that development in. So Villanova, and through the programs you have, are there programs that our builders are taking part in to look at more green initiatives? And I know, speaking with some of our builders, it's more expensive at times, but it's better for the environment on the back end. How do you go about that with working with builders?
Well, what we do is, obviously I'm an engineering professor. I don't have very many builders in my classes. However, we do have a conference every other year. It'll be this October. We have about 700 or 800 people from all areas of engineering coming. And as part of that conference, we have a day, the first day of it is a free, we charge $25 to pay for lunch. We have a free conference for municipal officials. And we have just to basically help with the education. And those are all recorded and submitted. And I would disagree with you on costing more, because it's costing more because you're stopping a problem. So if you're going to spend the money one way or the other. And frankly, we have found if you're smart about the design, you can reduce it. So for an example, get rid of a few inlets and put in a swale and use the green as the first start of the train before it gets to the gray. The green will work better. And what we've done, what's kind of bad in the past, is we've not included the benefits of the green when we've designed the gray. So we pretended the green wasn't there, which made the gray more expensive. So if we integrate it more, and I think we've learned these lessons, and this is, the whole profession is moving in that area. Thank you.
You talked about maintaining green infrastructure, and I think that's always one of the bad raps on green infrastructure is, well, you have to maintain it. We have a tendency to believe that gray infrastructure, you put it in the ground and it's there and it's good. And we know from experience that we have a lot of gray infrastructure that has leakage of groundwater into storm systems. We've got things that are cracked and create pollution issues. And those, when we don't maintain those, when we just put them in the ground and forget about them, they end up costing more in the long run because you end up having to replace this stuff. Can you talk a little bit about,
Sure. I mean, our experience in maintenance is that when a system is maintained, it'll function. And there's a difference in cost. Like Philadelphia, I think, first started trying to use landscapers for maintaining green infrastructure. You don't need that for picking up trash. And they've developed some programs with disadvantaged youth and trying to bring them into the work process. But it is a challenge. It's just something we've never done. And I had a student years ago who did a study and went to all the detention basins in Valley Creek area and found about half of them had holes in the berms. One, they planted bushes to hide the holes so nobody would have to fix them up. So it's always been an issue, but I think we need the design to address that. And we're just starting to do that. Like, we're working with PennDOT on the I-95 project where they're building a whole bunch of green infrastructure, and we're trying to work with them about lessons learned that we could promote to the world. And one of them is we found some sites that failed. The reason they failed, they had very steep sites. They had basically put so much mulch in, it all came down. So what the failure was the design of it itself, not what was coming off the highway. And so those are the things we can address within the engineering profession.
And one other thing, because I've been trying to convince people in my district to do parking lots that retain water, and they always go, yeah, but I'm going to put in one of those porous parking lots, and I have to get the vacuum to clean things up. And my contention has always been that a porous parking lot works because the water goes down through into a water sink down underneath the parking lot. I don't need to have my pavement be porous in order for that to happen. If I have outlets or inlets at the edge of my parking lot that go down into that same sink, I can have a standard parking lot pavement that's non-porous as long as the water from it goes underneath the parking lot. Are there...
You can. I mean, one of the challenges is that one of the benefits of porous pavement is the sediments and the pollutants get caught in the surface. So at the same time you're vacuuming it to maintain capacity, you're removing some of those pollutants. So if you're going to do that, you would still have to have some filter system to stop the pollutants from clogging what's underneath, but you can do that. We have a project at Villanova, which is a porous pavement between two of our dorms, she and Solvent, that was designed a long time ago. It takes about 3 inches of rain, and it takes it from the rooftops, and the roofs are pretty tall, so you don't have leaves. And then basically, it also goes through the pavement itself, so we're not getting the pollutants, and that's worked very well from what we can tell for a long period of time. But you do have to worry about the sediments, and there's ways, there's filters, there are systems that you can do what you're talking about.
Representative O'Meara?
So you just mentioned something that made me think of one more question. In my office and here in my district, I look out at a roof covered with pebbles. It is not pretty and it's not helping anything. Can you talk to at all the feasibility of putting green roofs and how, is it important? Is it cost effective? Why, is that something you can speak to?
Green roofs are very effective. I mean, the biggest problem you would have is making sure it structurally can support the added weight. And usually, a lot of times you can find, we have one at Villanova as a retrofit. We have about a ½ inch of soil, and we planted it, and it looks a lot prettier now. In fact, basically, it gets rid of about 85% of the water in a year, which is amazing for the growing season. I'm not talking about the wintertime, but we don't get as much water then anyway. But the other thing, what we're doing is we're trying to make these smarter systems. So we now capturing water off a gray roof. And one of the biggest problems of green roof, they only work when there's water. There's big periods of there's no water. So we're capturing water off the gray roof, using a computer system to water the green roof when it's dry, and actually we can release the water before a storm occurs to get more removals. And that basically, you can try to double the performance of the green roof to save money. Now, if you have a lot of green land, it's a lot cheaper to put in a rain garden. I mean, if you're trying to pave every inch of what you have, green roofs, I think, are a very good solution.
Representative Schusterman?
Yes, thank you. Professor, this might be an opposite program. In my district, which is Chester and Montgomery, we have an abundance of old bridges and an abundance of streams. And what I've been seeing is kind of like a small flash flooding that brings down the bridge, and the erosion is immense. Is there anything that is coming around the corner to anticipate that and to prevent that? Because the flash floods do both damage to the bridges and change. Hiking trails get eliminated, and the flow of the streams completely change.
Yeah. Well, this is another case where I think green infrastructure can be very helpful. When we look at the Pennsylvania statutes, the difference of the two-year storm, we've been actually doing some research on that and looking at what that does to the amount of hours that a stream is subject to velocities. And that's Western Washington uses that as a criteria. So basically cutting down the flashiness and dealing with the climate change. The nice thing about green infrastructure, we got hotter temperatures, that's more infiltration and more evapotranspiration. And have been looking at the change in the storms and how they look and how it works, and green infrastructure is well suited for most of that. Not talking about a hurricane, you still need a lot more help. That you're moving from stormwater into stormwater and flood protection. So the basic answer is, I would say, is we need to take a look, especially at older developments with no protection, to see what we can do to go back and retrofit and address some of those areas to cut down the volume and the flashiness. So.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
The next panel we have is Robert Zinkowski, Township Manager for Radnor Township, and Ken McLean, District 6 Executive from the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. Mr. Zinkowski?
Good morning, everyone. Mr. Chairman, Representative O'Meara, and members of the committee, and those staff members that are here. On behalf of our Board of Commissioners, I want to welcome you here to Radnor Township and to our beautiful facility that we have here, and taking the time to discuss a very important issue, which is infrastructure. Infrastructure is probably the backbone of all the communities. Many times we take it for granted that if it's not broken, don't fix it. However, that philosophy has probably worked for the last 30 or 40 years, but now it lies on your lap, as well as those of our boards and commissioners, that philosophy doesn't work anymore. And it's time that we have to fix it, and we can't kick the can down the road any further. Local government, and no offense to anybody here, is probably the closest, most touchable, interactive government because residents can get a hold of us immediately. They know that if their road has a problem, they call us. They don't know if it's a federal road, if it's a state road. Everybody, it's a Radnor Township road. If it's a tree, if there's a sewer, anything, we are the closest to that, and we deal with that quite a bit. And trying to have that line of communication and dialogue open is critical, especially when you look at how to fund infrastructure in the future, because there are many state highways, state roads, state infrastructure, from stormwater management, sanitary sewer transfers, is how does that get funded? And what type of partnerships can be created between the local government and the state government of how we can accomplish and achieve both of our goals. PA must, I believe, make a significant improvement in infrastructure to maintain the state's viability for business development and retention, long-term financial stability, the health, safety, and welfare of all of our residents, but also the financial stability for long-term commitment to infrastructure and to making Pennsylvania the best place to live, play, work, do business, and raise a family. Our Board of Commissioners, such as all of you, wrestle with the tough decisions as where to put money at, where do we allocate those dollars because of all the challenges. more and more the infrastructure is becoming in play because it's aged. We've heard about the different storms and the water coming down more. That has greater impacts. So when facilities aren't maintained and you have these types of decaying infrastructure, it only makes it worse. And that means the dollars, if we kick it off, which in some areas it has been for years, it only gets more expensive. So the difficult decisions I know are hard for you, as well as our board, is making those commitments for those dollars and trying to make the taxpayer's dollar go as far as possible. I would say that the roads, our sewers, stormwater management have to be improved, and more importantly, the maintenance and repair is key to that. We talk about new infrastructure, we talk about green infrastructure. Those are great things to manage stormwater management. However, there's a big component of that that comes in afterwards, which I know Dr. Traver talked about, is the maintenance. You do impervious pavement. That has to be maintained and cleaned and kept so that it's still porous. Rain gardens are tremendous. They look great, but how do you train people to say this is an invasive, this is a weed, this isn't, and how many staff members do you need? Because that grows infinitesimally there of how we try to maintain that and how do we budget for those types of things. Local governments cannot also subsidize other agencies. We have roads, we have other issues from flooding too, that we can as a township continue to subsidize operations of others, either at the county level or at the state level. We can't continue to do those maintenance items, maintenance repair items that we need to do. But it has become more and more now that it's fallen on the shoulders and backs of local governments, and especially I look at here in Radnor Township, where we have to maintain state roads, state routes. We have to do the patches, we have to do the repairs, we have to do sewer cleaning and repair because it's not available at that level. So again, our tax dollars should be going for other projects, our needs, instead of subsidizing other operations. There's some pictures here that we have just briefly, we'll run through real quickly, of just some of these items where you look at the state road infrastructure, and we know that the district is fully aware of these types of items, but these are items, again, too, that our commissioners get plenty of phone calls on where these items are there. We send our crews out to do and make the repairs, where, again, we're tying up our crew member time, we're tying up our budgetary times as well. It also gets into such items as tree maintenance and that trees within the right-of-way, where again, too, those fall within us to remove those when they come down. We have to remove, clean up from all those. We talk about catch basins, how critical they are for taking water in. But when you have in state of collapse, blockages or that, again, our agency has to take those types of action. So again, we look at building a partnership, a relationship with the state, how we can do this, how we can address roads, because again, we get those phone calls right away. We're the ones that, why don't you patch this? Why don't you pave this? Why are certain roads not being maintained? And it's hard for residents to understand that, well, this is a state route, this is a local route. They just look at, our tax dollars are going, fix the road. So it's those types of things, flooding, backups in roads, it's those types of things that are critical. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here in front of you today, have the opportunity to speak with you, share our community's concerns, again, with infrastructure and doing whatever we can on our end to help support you and your efforts, and again, trying to make Pennsylvania the best place to live, play, work, do business, and raise a family, because we all know that. We just got to make sure we maintain and keep that and continue to attract to this great community. Thank you.
Thanks. I think it's going to be easiest just because of the podium setup to do questions right away and then go to the next. Questions from members?
I have a question.
Representative Cerisi?
Excuse me. Thank you for the presentation. And, you know, seeing what you're putting up there, fully understand that when it is the state's responsibility, it is our responsibility. When it's the township's responsibility, it's yours. And to the voters, a road is a road. And as much as you may want to say that, you know, everyone gets mad because we know what it is, but I'm paying the taxes. There's a pothole on that road. Why aren't you fixing it? So one of the things I wanted to ask you, and this is going to be a little bit of a challenging question, but townships, municipalities that don't have the same means as other townships and municipalities can't do the maintenance that needs to be done, and they put it off. What would your recommendation be to them? Because I know I represent one in particular that doesn't have anywhere near the means of the township that we're sitting in, and that's just what it is. But that's why there are things that are disappearing, and you've been a township manager, I'm sure, in many other townships. So how do you prioritize, and how do you move that forward?
I think, again, as the board, we all look at how do we go ahead and line up what our priorities are. What is important here? We've got so many priorities, and again, not as much dollars that you have. One of the suggestions I would make is for the legislature to look at how liquid fuels money are being allocated, because there are certain things that can be used where we have parking areas and that, which again, people complain about those. They abut major thoroughfares, routes, roads. To have that to where this can be used for all type of road resurfacing, but also too, can it be used for at the same time doing those catch basin repairs, doing those pipes that are under roads that are blocked? Can that be utilized as well for those types of projects that are all tied to your roads? Because again, a lot of the water, it's going to roads, it's moving from there, heading underground or overground into streams, creeks, and then it's ending up, eventually it will make its way down through the rivers. But it's those types of things that can be looked at, that if there is a little bit more flexibility, those dollars can be allocated a little bit more towards some of these other projects than being restricted only to these types of uses.
Representative O'Meara?
So I have more of a comment than a question. I first want to thank you for making this presentation, for bringing us evidence. And I just want to say that you're not alone in this fight. I'm also hearing from residents. I'm writing back to them personally. I think you're copied on some of those emails sometimes. So I just want you to know that my priority is going to make sure we have that line of communication. I'm going to be heading to PennDOT next week to talk to them with, our list that we've been cultivating with Lisa and the other members of the board. But I just want you to know that we are here because we want to do this too. We want to make sure that we are investing in these quality of life improvements. So thank you for your commitment to Radnor Township. I know Radnor Township is not the only township dealing with these issues across the Commonwealth, but we're here, and many of us traveled from far distances because we care so much about this. So thank you, and we're going to continue to build that line of communication.
Thank you, and thank you for all your support too. And I know all of you here from your local communities. And again, I think the more you continue to reach out to the local communities, I think it'll be a great partnership to come up with solutions that help us both at the end of the day.
Thanks. Just one comment, I guess I'll get your reaction to it, or maybe two comments. One is, I know Radnor Township has a police department, so you don't take advantage of the free state police protection that some townships do if they say, well, we're just not going to pay for police. And so they've made a priority decision to say they don't want police as long as somebody else is willing to pay their police bill. In defense of PennDOT, we take, of the $3 billion that they get in road dollars, we take $800 million off the top and use it to pay for state police so that some municipalities can get free police protection. One, I think that would go a long way if we could get that $800 million back to making some of those road repairs. If municipalities that don't do what I believe is their local responsibility, which is policing, would just take that responsibility back, and we could use the dollars for road repairs instead. So I'm hoping we can get your support on that one. The governor's talked about even just an inconsequential amount of money to start getting some dollars back so that it's not all $800 million at once, but we can start out with 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 million coming back, which will help also. The other thing is, and this one gets real controversial, and so I will say this is not a Democratic policy, but it's one of my sort of pet peeves. A few years ago, the Secretary of Transportation said to me that if a road does not get 10,000 cars a day or more, the liquid fuels tax doesn't pay for the road. It is then subsidized by a road that does get more than 10,000 cars a day. And Pennsylvania as a state maintains more roads than all of New England, New York, New Jersey, and Maryland combined. So in any other state that I go into, if I get off the main roads, I'm on a local road. And in some states that means it's gravel. In some states it means that it's pretty poorly maintained, but it's not the state's responsibility. And in the state of Pennsylvania, I always say we have the best maintained back roads of any state in the nation, We just got potholes on the roads that everybody drives on. So I've been encouraging, the state has a take-back program where they encourage municipalities to take the roads back, but it's not mandatory. And I've been encouraging us to make that a mandatory program where we start with roads that get less than 1,000 cars a day and say, municipality has to take it back. And if they don't want it, if the county doesn't want it or the municipality doesn't want it, PennDOT will shut that road down. Because if it's not important to the locals, why should it be important to PennDOT? And then, you know, a couple years later, say anything that's less than 2,000 cars a day, same thing. I mean, I get people just flying off the handle at me about that, but it would make us much more like any other state and take a whole burden off of PennDOT. It would take half their load off of them if we could do that and get to roads that had less than 10,000 cars a day being taken care of by the local municipality. Is that something that flies in Radnor Township or not?
I won't speak on behalf of the board, but in my opinion, I think it would. The only concern I have, and there's a state to the west of us that borders us, actually did a similar program, but what they did is they said, we'll do the turn back to you, but however, we're going to put that road in good shape. So when we turn it over, that road is perfect. So it's not where, well, you take this road that's got all these holes and berms and that, we're just going to give it to you now. Because
And
we will fix it, make it perfect, and then turn it back, and then that's yours.
And that is part
has
of
worked.
PennDOT's turnback program right now, which is why I think we should be able to say it's mandatory. And, you know, if after 10 years or 20 years that road's in bad shape because the local municipality decided not to continue to maintain it at that point in time, well, then that's on them, it shouldn't be on PennDOT. We can't afford to continue, like you said, you don't want to subsidize what PennDOT's supposed to be doing, and I fully understand that. I'm tired of PennDOT having to subsidize roads that aren't producing for our economy. The road that gets 1,000 cars a day, I mean, I'm always told, yeah, but there's that milk truck that goes down that road. And okay, fine, so get a smaller milk truck, you know? I mean, but I just, it's hard to justify that subsidy when I see the kinds of pictures that you showed in roads that are getting 10, 20, 30,000 cars a day. And that's 30,000 cars that are hitting a pothole versus a back road that won't get 30,000 cars in a month.
Correct.
So.
I agree.
I'm on the transportation committee, so.
Okay, all right.
Fund PennDOT, give them the money, especially in this district. No offense to anybody else, but, you know, they're trying to do the best they can with limited people, limited resources, and I'm sure it's very hard for them, just as it is for us.
Yeah, all right.
Thank you.
All right, next up is Ken McLean, District 6 Executive with the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation.
Great. Thank you very much, Chairman. Good morning, committee members and staff. My name's Ken McLean. I serve as the District Executive for PennDOT's Engineering District 6. Thank you, Representative O'Mara, for hosting the session today and inviting us to partake in all of the regalia. We appreciate it. We appreciate the opportunity to testify before you to highlight some of the accomplishments and challenges that PennDOT has at a high level and a regional area as well. So, as many of you may know or may not know, PennDOT is broken up into 11 separate engineering districts across the state. District 6, which I represent as the district executive, is comprised of 5 counties. It's Bucks, Chester, Delaware, Montgomery, and Philadelphia counties. We are responsible for the ownership and maintenance of roughly 3,500 miles of state-owned highway, which breaks down into over 9,700 lane miles of highway. We own in excess of 2,700 bridges and 92 miles of interstate highway. While this heavily populated district only encompasses 7% of Pennsylvania's land mass, we comprise 33% of the state's population, nearly 50% of the state's traffic signal inventory, 11% of its bridges, 24% of the registered vehicles in the state, and 24% of the daily vehicle miles traveled in the state of Pennsylvania, so which is kind of staggering. Testimony from my counterparts to this committee from across the state have warned that the Commonwealth was operating on a $3.5 billion funding gap between identified transportation infrastructure needs and what current funding allocations provide. In 2011, a report by the Transportation Funding Advisory Commission identified that the infrastructure needs in 2010 were roughly $8.3 billion. While $8.3 billion was needed to properly maintain and address our transportation network, only $4.8 billion was being spent on transportation. In 2019, that problem continues to grow. The Transportation Funding Advisory Commission reports that current funding needs have increased from $8.3 billion per year to $11.5 billion, which is a 38.5% increase since the year 2010. The increase is due to increased construction costs and the continued deterioration of our roadway and bridge network as a result of inadequate funding. With current federal and state funding at $8.6 billion, our unmet need for 2020 is now projected to be $7.2 billion, more than twice the $3.5 in unmet need from the 10 years identified prior by the TFAC. Currently, Pennsylvania has the second highest numbers of bridges in poor condition in the nation, with nearly 2,900. Our bridges are a critical part of our state transportation system, with most of them being over 50 years of age. And they're well exceeding their design life, because that's what bridges were designed for, about 50 years back in the day. Now we design them for around 75 to 100 years. We must continue to invest in our bridge program to address bridges in poor condition and to keep more bridges in a good condition, because every year if we deliver, say, 20 bridges a year, the older bridges that aren't being touched continue to age, and they then slide into the category of being in poor condition. So sometimes if we deliver 10, 3 might slide on, so if you're taking 3 steps forward, you're also taking 1 step back proverbially. Another area that requires critical resources are our interstate highways. The interstate system is funded at less than 50% of the cyclic need. Each year, approximately $460 million is allocated to interstates, yet the funding need to simply conduct cyclic maintenance and to get a state of good repair should be around $1.2 billion, which is more than double the current allocation. Even more funding is needed to address reconstruction needs, modernization, and to make strategic investments to address freight movement and capacity needs. Funding for the National Highway System. So what is the National Highway System? There are roads like Route 322, 202, 309, Route 1, just to locally speak. That situation is even more dire. Excluding the interstate portion, the National Highway System roads are currently funded at $742 million per year, but the cost of basic maintenance is $2.2 billion, which is triple our annual investment in that segment of our roadway network. Governor Wolf has recently proposed Restore Pennsylvania, which is a major infrastructure initiative which will begin to address some of these needs. Restore Pennsylvania will provide funding for local road upgrades, the repair of 4-digit state roads, create new flexible funding options for businesses that need local infrastructure upgrades to enable development projects to occur, and multimodal and large-scale capital program projects for transit. Restore Pennsylvania is an important first step in addressing the Commonwealth's infrastructure needs. In southeastern Pennsylvania, PennDOT faces transportation challenges due to aging infrastructure and the congestion that motorists face daily when traveling in the 5th largest metropolitan region in the country. The infrastructure needs in District 6 significantly outweigh the financial resources available to meet them. However, we're doing our best to prioritize those and meet them on a case-to-case basis with the funding that we have. Of the 11 engineering districts across the state, District 6 is the home to PennDOT's largest design program and construction program. So oftentimes you can take the next 2 districts, combine them, and they just equal what our program is, or you can take the bottom 5 most rural districts, add their programs together, and that equals what our program is here in District 6. So District 6 has let an average, which is a bid opening, an average of $576 million a year in transportation improvement program projects over the last 5 years, including resurfacings on Interstate 76, known as the Schuylkill Expressway, and I-95. We've reconstructed portions of Interstate 95, and we've done major corridor improvements on U.S. Routes 1, 202, 422, and 322. Today, there are 130 transportation improvement projects currently on the ground in District 6 worth approximately $2.5 billion. Among these projects in Delaware County are the $63 million widening of US 322, which is known as the Conchester Highway, $20 million replacement of the Route 452 bridge over Amtrak and SEPTA, $17 million bridge rehabilitation of 8 bridges over Interstate 95 near the city of Chester, and the $13 million replacement of the 252 bridge at the Springton Reservoir. District 6's portfolio of transportation improvement projects currently in engineering design consists of over 300 projects, worth a total of $6.8 billion. In Delaware County alone, there are 41 projects worth $928 million. Among these future projects are the widening of the eastern section of US 322, improving the US Route 1 352 interchange, and instituting travel management strategies along the Blue Route, also Interstate 476. This investment has enabled District 6 to reduce the numbers of bridges in poor condition from a number of 600 in the year 2009, reduced to 398 today. In addition, the amount of bridge deck area in poor condition has been reduced from 20% of our inventory in 2009 down to 8.8% of our inventory today. Improvements are steadily being made, but challenges remain because many older bridges move into the poor condition category each year, as I explained earlier. District 6 has worked aggressively to resurface roads in the poorest conditions with the available funds on hand. However, the massive side of the state highway system makes pavement conditions another difficult challenge. Act 89 has been extremely beneficial in increasing the size of the district's annual resurfacing program. From 2014 to 2018, the district resurfaced over 1,000 miles of roadway, including 149 miles in Delaware County. In 2019, we plan to resurface 285 bridges in our 285 miles of road in our 5-county region, with 60 of those being improved in Delaware County. Resurfacing the seal pavements is critical to providing smooth roads, combat difficult winter seasons, which often result in early damaging outbreaks of potholes. Over the past 3 years, District 6 invested an average of $6.5 million annually to place over 12,000 tons of patching material on state roads. Thus far in 2019, $3.1 million has been spent to place 3,100 tons of patching material, including over 500 tons of patching material in Delaware County alone. Crews are working daily to fix potholes, and we plan to take advantage of patching on Saturdays when blacktop plants are open and available for our business. And that'll become more prevalent as the season goes on and it gets warmer. It was harder to do that in February and early March. As crews respond to road and bridge concerns in District 6, we also fight an uphill battle with litter and debris, which is strewn along our roadsides if you take a drive. In 2018, $5.2 million was allocated to litter removal in the 5-county region in District 6. What could we have done with that $5.2 million? We could have resurfaced over 26 miles of state highway, but instead we have our crews out there picking up litter, which has become epidemic in my opinion. Finally, regarding traffic congestion, District 6 is implementing the use of active traffic management strategies within most congested corridors, such as I-76 and 476, and that's using technology to move traffic along better without having to do a conventional brick and mortar reconstruction of those highways, because that's very, very costly. As I said earlier, we just don't have the money to do it. Part of this innovative program is the I-476 Flex Lane project in Delaware County, which is starting preliminary engineering as we speak. Transforming the highway shoulders into part-time travel lanes will reduce congestion by providing a third travel lane during certain times of the day along the 4-lane section of the Blue Route between Routes 3 and I-95. We're also going to extend that same concept southbound on 95 from the intersection of the Blue Route down to the Commodore Barry Bridge, which is US 322. The project is anticipated to move to construction in early 2023. Complementing this advanced technology that we're bringing to the district, PennDOT's new Regional Traffic Management Center will be built adjacent to the District 6 building in King of Prussia. This is a 37,000 square foot facility that will replace the current cramped center, which is in our existing building. As we bring a lot of these intelligent transportation system devices into the district, I mean, they're growing. We have over 600 cameras, 400 miles of roadway, 1,500 ITS devices in the state. We need a bigger, larger facility to help manage this, because congestion management is such a critical component to what we do here in southeastern Pennsylvania. We anticipate this new facility to be open in late 2021. So I just want to thank you once again for having PennDOT to be part of this program, and I'm available for any questions that you may have.
Thanks. Questions from members? Representative Madden.
Hi, thank you for your testimony. $5.2 million to pick up litter, that's a pretty staggering number when you think about what it's for. How aggressive or how are you working? In the Poconos, we've have a similar litter problem, and we've started an initiative called Picking Up the Poconos that we're doing with the Tourism Bureau. What kind of a budget do you have for signs along the road that say, you know, fee for littering, $300? I mean, is there a possibility that we could get more aggressive on the fines and letting people know that this won't be tolerated in our state, and trying to recoup some of that money that way?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I guess the General Assembly just recently passed a critical corridor signing legislation. So we're going through that legislation right now to identify all of the scenic byways in Pennsylvania were identified as critical litter corridors. We can add roads to that list. So we're going through the process in District 6 right now to look on a road-by-road basis what our expenditures were to combat litter. And we may be designating some of those corridors as additional signed. And then what would happen is it may double or increase the fines for littering. But going back to what one of the previous panel members said, we really need to make this an educational component too. I remember when I was growing up, there were people in schools. It was a high outreach. There were radio ads and public service announcements on TV, and there was a Native American with a tear, and that was a commercial that was very moving to people. And when you could relate to people, you know, maybe it could help to combat some of this stuff. So, you know, we need to educate. We need to enforce, and I know our police officers, whether the state police, local police, they're taxed. But if they do see people littering, we would encourage them to fine them. We work with many civic groups. I know when we met with Representative Schusterman, she expressed an interest in getting some civic groups together. There are Adopt a Highway programs that are out there. There are a couple other programs with correctional facilities where we've teamed with in the past. Never did we do it in Philadelphia, but in the other 4 counties, we had a program like that. I believe the only program is actually still in Delaware County that exists in our district, where we're working with correctional facilities or people that need to do community service to help do it. It's a challenge. With the amount of traffic that we have here, you can't have Cub Scout troops or Girl Scout troops out on busy highways because it becomes a safety issue. So, but we need to do more, and we need to partner with local agencies, with agencies such as DEP. I know DEP does 2 or 3 cleanups a year where they, you know, keep Pennsylvania beautiful, and they have an initiative. And I know our secretary goes out with the DEP secretary. So it's becoming epidemic, and what I've seen is in urban districts such as District 6 and District 11, which is Pittsburgh, we're a leading indicator of what's to come. And as I've been talking about this over the last 3 to 4 years with my peers across the state, it's now starting to hit them as well in some of the rural districts. So I think as it starts to hit more areas of the state, then it's going to become a higher magnitude issue.
I have a follow-up. So the money that's collected through the fines for littering, does that money go back to PennDOT for that program to clean up the roads?
I don't know. So I would have to get back to you on that.
Okay.
Since the legislation just passed, it came across my desk about a week ago, and I'm not up to snuff on what all the legislation has, but I know we're looking to do the roadway inventory to see which roads we need to designate. But I'm not sure of the financial part of it, to be honest.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Representative Webster?
I was going to ask a similar question about the litter, so I'll just make a quick statement and kind of get off the stage here. When you first said the word epidemic around the litter, and I think everybody can very quickly picture, you know, some segment of woods along a road and how terrible it is, whether it's somebody who actually, you know, dropped off 3 tires. I noticed that yesterday along a road. You know, somebody dumped that there. That wasn't somebody who had a flat tire and got stuck, or all the packaging things and plastic bottles. I think it's probably more than a PennDOT problem, and it's something for all of us to think about more culturally. Some states have outlawed plastic bags, and I know people do that in the grocery stores. They're bringing their cloth bags, but Pennsylvania hasn't become progressive in those kinds of ways. Everybody's eating in their cars, and where do those wrappers end up? I guess. Well, I don't think there's anybody in this room who typically throws something out the window of a car. Apparently, a lot of people do, and the plastics are enormous. So this is a big cultural issue for Pennsylvania, and I'm glad, you notice it as a concerned civil servant working with PennDOT, but I think it's way bigger than that, and I guess I'll just plant my flag in that regard. Thanks.
We track our complaints that we receive, and I sign a ton of letters. And our number one complaint during the year is obviously potholes, but they're normally, February, March, April. The second highest is actually litter. It's not even congestion, which amazes me. But litter, it bothers people. And everywhere you go when you're driving your car has a trash receptacle. So if you're eating in your car, open the door, and when you're going into the office, there's a receptacle there everywhere you go.
Representative Williams?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thank you for your testimony today. I'm just curious, given the use of technology in regards to the active traffic management strategies, typically when I'm on the road, I see most people still looking at their cell phones. I'm curious, is there any documentation or evidence to suggest how effective it is?
The active traffic management?
Yes.
This has been a technology that's crept up in certain pockets across the country. So I know it's out in Seattle, it's down in Northern Virginia. We had a peer-to-peer meeting with the Federal Highway Administration, the Pennsylvania State Police, to come in and actually see if this could work in Pennsylvania. And this is going to be the first area in the state of Pennsylvania where it's going to work. So I don't know that there's any statistics readily available with regards to effectiveness as it relates to aggressive driving, but it does reduce congestion by an upwards of 33%. Just in areas where it's been implemented.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Representative O'Meara?
Thank you, Ken, very much for being here and for your testimony. I have two questions. My first one is, can you speak to how PennDOT prioritizes their projects and when they're going to make an important improvement project? I know here in Radnor, we have a bridge over King of Prussia Road that with Amtrak and SEPTA over top of it, that trucks are hitting it constantly, and it's become a major, I walked under it recently, ran through it because I was nervous about it crumbling. And so I'm just wondering, how do you make those priority decisions when you have the funding problem that you are facing?
Yeah, so we have two streams of funding. One is our capital funding, and all of that money, it consists of state funding and state capital dollars and federal funding. That comes through the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. They are the planning commission that works with each of the 5 county planning regions or county planners in the region to help prioritize and identify transportation improvement programs. The particular bridge that you're talking about is an Amtrak-owned bridge. So that's where the nuance with that one comes in, why there may or may not be state money available for it, because it's technically owned. It's on our road, but it's owned by Amtrak. But what happens is PennDOT has what's called a 12-year program. And the 12-year plan is exactly what it is. Magically, 12 years financially constrained of what kind of funding we're going to have come in. And we plan our projects. There's usually five phases to our projects: preliminary engineering, final design, right-of-way acquisition, utility relocations, and then construction. So in order to have a project put on that 12-year program, we have to be able to fully fund construction by the 12th year. So that's usually the impact. We spend 75% of our capital program on construction. And like I said, we had $2.5 billion of active construction on the ground, and we have some large infrastructure projects in our district. So as most of the money is going toward construction, it's being harder and harder to bring new projects on as a candidate project. But that program is updated every 2 years. It's called the Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP. Every odd year it gets updated. New projects come on as older projects are built, and that money comes off. So that's kind of where it goes. So I tell any municipality or any legislator, if you're really interested in a large capital project, or any capital project for that matter, talk to your county planners, make sure that they're on board, the county commissioners, because they have a seat on the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, and that's where the money gets divided out and programmed over that 12-year time frame.
Okay.
And I can answer, I could talk about this for 3 hours, so if you want to get together at some point, I don't have a problem explaining it in more detail to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And then my next question is, as our township manager talked about, there are often times where the township receives so many complaints and cars are being damaged by residents, and they try getting someone out to fix it from the state and it doesn't happen, and they end up fixing it themselves. So that's township resources that are being spent. Is there any mechanism that townships can use to collect those resources back? Or is there anything we can do to prevent them from having to spend those resources in the first place?
Okay, two-part question. So I don't believe there's any mechanism to retro reimburse them for, and first of all, I don't advocate that any township goes out and does any work on a state road. That's our responsibility. So I think, I really appreciate Mr. Zinkowski's comments, and he stressed, how much our resources are taxed and his resources are taxed, and there's no doubt I agree with almost everything he had to say, that we have to, invest more highly in, infrastructure in Pennsylvania. I would just say if we could open the lines of communication better to help prevent that from happening, that's the best case. 2 years ago, PennDOT tried a pilot program where we were actually looking for municipalities to sign up with a pothole repair contract with us. So we would actually hire them, go under contract for a 2-year period, and they can do pothole repairs on our roads, and then we would reimburse them by the ton. And we haven't had any success in District 6 here in doing that. So that's something that we could enter into again with other municipalities if they're interested, and we could use your help to get that word out to those municipalities. We met with Radnor specifically in August 2017 to exchange some ideas and some of their frustrations on our roads. We actually conducted a road tour with them in September of 2018, and I found that to be very useful, just continuing to open up those lines of communication. Certainly, you can't over-communicate, so I'd encourage both the township and my staff to continue that level of dialogue, as well as the other municipalities in Delaware County, and there's 49 of them, I believe. So even though it's a very small county, there's 49 municipalities in it.
Okay.
So it's
All
a
right.
challenge.
And
Did I answer all of your questions?
Yes, and we'll talk more next week. My last is just a comment. I'm glad you brought up all the trash, because I've heard about the litter on the Blue Route. And I agree. When I grew up in the city, I used to spend my time with my dad picking up litter for fun. It was important to us. And I think we've gotten away from that. And I actually am going to challenge my colleagues. I think it's on us to remind people that it's really important, and we should be focusing on cleanup days and fixing that where we can. I would go onto the Blue Route and clean up myself if I could, but it's not safe. But if we can help find programs to adopt those highways here in District 6, please let us know, because I think it's important to many of us. So
We'll do that.
Thank you.
Challenge accepted, first of all. And I wanted to sort of, I'm going to pass some credit to the end of the line here, because Representative Schusterman's had us out cleaning the Valley Forge Park before. So we're on board, Jen. We're behind you.
Thanks. One comment, if I could, and I know we've talked about this as it relates to the trash issue. If, when we walked in here today, the chairs were all strewn around, not in an orderly fashion, and there were marks on the wall, and maybe the window in the back was broken, and the desk had nicks in it, and, the screen was torn, and my attitude would be, no one cares about this place, so why should I? One of the things that I've noticed is even when the trash gets cleaned up, when PennDOT goes through before a mowing and clean it all up and they mow it, and that all looks fine, but there's still a busted delineator and a signpost that's halfway tipped over that the sign got knocked off of, and there's ruts where somebody ran off the road, and there's some banged up guardrail and a pile of extra macadam that got left there when the guy got finished paving and he dumped his, and I look around and I go, the place still looks like a hellhole. And so then I say to people, now make sure you don't throw any trash there, though. How can we best coordinate to make sure that there's this, look, I understand it has nothing to do with the operational portion of the road itself, but there is this aesthetic portion of that road where if I drive down a parkway and there's some flowers planted and the signs are all standing straight up and there's no trash, I feel good about that road whether there's bumps in it or not. And if I drive down one that looks like I'm driving through a war zone, it doesn't matter how smooth the surface is, I still think I'm driving through a war zone.
No, you're right, and we had this conversation, earlier in the week, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think that there's room for improvement, at least in our district. I don't want to speak on behalf of the other 10 district executives, but we have to permeate a culture amongst our workforce of just pride in where you are and what you're doing, and just try to multitask. So if we're out there doing litter pickup, maybe we can replace the delineators at the same time. If you go out too many times, it's too many safety patterns, it becomes ineffective cost-wise. But if we can do a better job planning and multitasking our jobs, maybe we can do several things while we're out there. So that is a comment that I already took back as of our last hearing to our county maintenance, to our assistant district executive for maintenance. So we're going to strive to improve where we can. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Anthony Lucy, Jr., who is the business agent for the Delaware County Operating Engineers Local 542.
Good morning, Board. Residents of Radnor Township. My name is Tony Lucy, and I'm a local labor leader for the operating engineers and Delaware County Building Trades. I'm a lifelong member and resident of Delaware County, fourth generation. For those who do not know what an operating engineer is, we're heavy equipment operators. I just found out about this meeting and upcoming work a few months ago at a fundraiser. Some of my colleagues started informing me of their concerns and own negative personal experiences regarding some sewer storm management and some new infrastructure. They knew this was kind of in my realm. Issues ranging from constant backups, sinkholes, traffic concerns, water collecting on the streets, and other related issues. Myself and other labor leaders attend many of these same type of meetings on a weekly basis throughout Delaware County and beyond. We respectfully get up and state our concerns, but it always seems to be about the bottom line and the cheapest price on the job. Being a businessman, I completely get the bottom line. While keeping that in mind, I believe that there are a few other important points that need to be taken into consideration. Qualification of the lowest bidder, not to bore you or be redundant with everything else that everyone has been saying today, but to me, qualification could be the most intricate part of this process. Non-qualified or shoddy contractors can create havoc through construction due to their lack of professionalism or experience. Issues at hand vary from longer length of time to complete the job, bad workmanship resulting in leaks, leading to sinkholes, sometimes not for months down the line and then after the job is completed and the contractor is out of town, thus resulting in more construction and, of course, more money spent by the township on the taxpayers' backs. Poor traffic control making it unsafe for not only for the construction workers, but also for the residents as well. Poor paving after the pipe is in the ground due to inadequate compaction, once again resulting in road surfaces being bumpy and unsafe for motorists. This is just a few named unsafe and costly issues from a contractor's point of view. Secondly, but still very important to myself, local participation. Speaking on behalf of my own local, we have roughly 115 direct Radnor residents living here and around 679 Delaware County residents in total. We also have about 15 specialty contractors and around 20 more that are qualified from Radnor and also Delaware County that perform nothing but sewer work and infrastructure work. These are qualified, hardworking contractors and residents that pay taxes here, spend money here, and have a vested interest in our community. Some of the projects going on right now at Villanova University and the new Penn Medicine right down the road, and many more is work currently being performed of the building trades. Far too many contractors come into our neighborhoods over the years from out of town, take our jobs, for a lower wage, rip our towns apart, finish the job, leave, and spend their earnings elsewhere. In closing, I wanted to bring to light my concerns that go into the entire process of construction. It doesn't just stop after the job is awarded. A good and honest contractor is married to the job from its infancy through the construction process and years after. I want to thank the board and everyone here today for listening to me and allowing me to speak. I respectfully ask the board to please take these additional concerns into consideration when choosing the contractor of choice and the workers that will be performing these important projects to better our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from members? Representative Mara?
So thank you very much for being here and for adding what I think is a really important element to this conversation. My question would be, as I'm in now as state rep, what can I do better or what can we do better to make sure that we are involving labor into these conversations?
Well, I did bring up that the lowest price approach is not always the good approach. So that would be first and foremost. Doing an investigation into the contractor of choice at the time, maybe the lowest bidder, and doing our due diligence to make sure that this is in their realm of work. That's a huge help to us. And then also with the local participation thing, I mean, I hear it from my members all the time. You know, there's a job on my street, you know, and they take pride in that. I mean, I know growing up, my entire family, I'm fourth generation. You know, my great-grandfather got in 1927. So I drove by bridges and buildings and with my father growing up, and it was always, hey, I built that, or I built this, or I built that. So we want to kind of continue that lineage in the counties and that pride that we extrude. So.
My grandfather used to do that with me in Philly. We built that, we built that. So I know how important that is. But thank you. I think even having you here is a great start to having you included in this conversation.
And if there's anything I can help you guys out with in the future, I'd be glad to help out.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Representative Madden?
Hello.
I don't have a question. I just want to say thank you for testifying, and I absolutely agree with you. We should be having, these jobs done with unions, people who take pride, people who make a living wage completing these projects, and anytime you need our help, just reach out.
Excellent. It's nice to hear that. Have a great one. Thank you.
I have one question for you, because one of the things, you bring up this issue of having local participation, and I actually think it makes some sense in that, we're constantly, though, it's like if you don't take the low bid, why are you not taking the low bid? If you do take the low bid, are you getting a good job? If you say, I give it to this guy instead, is it because he's your buddy and you know? And so government always has to balance that out, and I understand that. But I think there might be something to doing a deal where we say we give some points to a bid if it's local participation, because we know we're keeping money in the community. I mean, even my Chamber of Commerce has this promotion to think local and buy local, because they know that that's money reinvested in the local economy. I say that, and then I will also say that my county is pretty much an anti-union county. And so they will, if they have an opportunity to take a local guy versus a union contractor, they'll take the local guy any day of the week. And so I'm always torn between, how I go about this and where that delicate balance is. And I think it's something that we need to sort of do a lot more fleshing out on, so that we can make sure that, I guess ultimately in the end, I favor keeping the money locally, because that's what's going to make I can't say if it's kept in Pennsylvania versus another state, because then I violate interstate laws. But I think I can say keep it local.
Absolutely.
Okay. I think it's a discussion that we need to continue with, though.
And it's probably not going to be completed for a while, that discussion. So.
Thank you.
All right.
And last but not least, we have James Harper Jr., Business Manager of Laborers Local 413.
Good morning, everyone. Still morning, yes. Good morning. Again, James Harper, Laborers Local 413, just to reiterate on a few things Tony said. He pretty much took all my notes, so I'm going to put this away. And the one question you just asked, having a local contractor over a non-union contractor or a union versus non-union, one of the things that we as unions do is pride ourselves on local participation. I know particularly here in Delaware County and other counties as well, wherever we have representation, we pride ourselves on going into the school districts and recruiting kids that may not have an interest in going to college right away. Gives them opportunity through our apprenticeship programs that we self-fund to make a earning or a livable wage as they're going through our training programs. So that's just one of the other caveats that we do offer as unions. We also, I mean, we consider ourselves part of the makeup of the county. There are 25 union trades in the 5-county area, and we probably have over 50-some-odd thousand members in Delaware County and throughout Chester County. And that's just in this immediate area. However, one of the things that we brag about we are the coaches. We coach the Little League, we coach football, we are the pastors and the deacons and involved in the local churches and involved in the local community, and which our counterparts are as well. But that's one of the prideful things we talk about with our members. We are involved in many community service projects, from building local parks and, again, volunteering for Little Leagues. Our particular local ones, Little League in the city of Chester, where 4 guys in the office, we are the administrative staff of the league. So we cut the grass, we recruit the kids, we coach the teams, and it goes on throughout the area. And that's just one of the homegrown things that we always preach and talk to our members about as being part of a local union. Just to throw that caveat out there to you. Also, stormwater. As far as stormwater, we do have several contractors that work with stormwater authorities now. The most recent one that we did start to work with is in the city of Chester, where I guess about 1.5 years ago they created a stormwater authority. They went through hearings and they currently have that authority there. They have, I want to say, about 4 or 5 projects going on right now, and we do have local participation. We had an opportunity to bring in or work with their 4 contractors that they have and do a local hiring job fair for the kids in the city of Chester. So we probably brought in about 10 to 12 kids from the city of Chester onto that project. We pride ourselves in going into various school districts. Everyone wants their kid to go to school, their child to go to school. I mean, we're out here in Radnor, which is has a great school, and of course, we pride ourselves in having our kids go to school. However, that just isn't the case. A young person's 18, 19 years old, they have their own thought on what the world is and what the world can offer them. So we are another opportunity for kids to take advantage of and continue to be productive in society without going to school for 3 years, 2 years, and accumulating a whole bunch of debt, which parents usually do appreciate, and the kid does. And there's always opportunity to go back to school, as well as through our apprenticeship programs. Through, I believe, 90% of our apprenticeship programs, after you complete your tenure as an apprentice, you will receive an associate's degree. And we have opportunities with our contractors that we work with to do continuing education as well. One other thing that we talked about a little earlier was the littering on the highway and the streets and the neighborhoods. I think one of the simple things that we can do, our friends that are teachers or involved in the school districts, get them to talk about it in school again. You know, that was a practice that we had when I was in school, keeping your workstation clean, your classroom clean, your playground clean. If you, as a gentleman said earlier, as you said earlier, if you're coming down the road and you see trash and stuff on the road, you're going to just throw your trash out the window. A kid's going to walk down the street, open a bag of chips, or throw a bubblegum wrapper on the floor, on the ground. If you're walking down a clean street or clean neighborhood, if you're riding down 95, 291, 476, and it's clean, you aren't going to be the first person to throw any trash out there. So again, it's a sense of pride, self-worth, and that's all part of the things that we teach through our apprenticeship program. And we insist that our members have and pride in the work that they do on the projects that we work on. As Anthony said, we are currently working up the street at the Penn Medical Center. We probably have 5 or 6 contractors up there, and we're working with Villanova University and their engineering department as they continue to win Final Four championships. They're going to continue to have kids that want to come to school here. We will continue to build, but we want to make sure we're doing it the right way, working with their engineering department and making sure we're following specs and make everything most cost effective and green as we can. We just recently opened a office in the city of Philadelphia where we have a green roof on it. And inside the building, we have a catch basin to catch all the water that came from rain, and that water we recycle and use it for the commodes, to flush the commodes in the building. But I mean, that's something that we can continue to work with Villanova with to create and design these apparatuses that we can continue to use to build a healthy, green, and livable environment. And if there are any other questions, sorry I didn't get into construction a whole bunch, but if there are any other questions, I know it's getting late and our panel's getting smaller, so I don't want to
Representative Williams?
longer.
Not really a question, just a comment and a statement, some of which I think can be directed at a kind of generational emphasis that was well-intentioned but misguided. An appreciation for what I think is vocational training, technical training, that we're seeing a sort of reversal of, and recognizing that not every young person has to do 4 years, that there is still an incredible amount of intellectual heft required to participate in the trades, vocationally, technically, and you should know that you have a fan, at least by many of the people sitting on this podium today.
Oh, we certainly appreciate it. And again, just 18 years old, I had a great opportunity to go to college. I loved it, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. If I would have waited 2 years or so and went straight into a trade, I would have had a chance to mature some and then really had a direction. Many of our kids that take advantage of our apprenticeship programs, pardon me, and then come back and take advantage of our apprenticeship programs and get their 2-year associate's degree. Again, they'll go off to complete and receive their 4-year degree. However, many of them come back as superintendents, going into engineering programs and elsewhere. So they're coming back to still service us in the construction industry and our community.
I was speaking autobiographically, by the way, because one of the things I did as a parent was try to turn my children into me. So I did 4 years undergrad, MDiv, graduate school, doctoral program. And it dawned on me years later that I was misguiding them in trying to make them in my image. My son, my daughters have all been much more given at working in ways I could not, and so I appreciate the testimony. Thank you for the time.
Thanks. Representative O'Mara?
So thank you, Jim, for being here today. I have a question and sort of a comment. So I have also younger brothers, not sons, but my one younger brother is 17 years old right now, and he's asking me to help him look at what he wants to do. Is it college or is it skilled labor? And I was wondering if you could speak to, at least for your local, what is the apprenticeship program like? How long does a person go through that program? What kind of skills do they learn? And why do you think the apprenticeship program is such a valuable component of the labor movement? Well,
the laborers ourselves, we may have one of the smaller apprenticeship programs. Our particular program is a 2-year program, consists of 4,000 hours of on-the-job training and 300 additional hours of classroom training. Then the other trades, more specialty trades, the operating engineers, the plumbers, the carpenters, the glazers, they get a little more specific portions of construction. Their programs can be anywhere between 3 to 4 years, consist of 8,000 hours of on-the-job training. I also, if there is anyone interested, or if your brother is interested, we do have a website that he can go to get information on the various programs, apprenticeship programs in a 5-county area. And that website is apprentice.org. Apprentice.org, apprentice.org. And it has information on all 25 building trades, apprenticeship programs, when they take applications, how long their apprenticeship program is, what the minimum requirements are to gain access to their apprenticeship programs.
Thank you. I just want to add, I'm a before being elected, I'm a certified teacher. And I can tell you, my student teaching experience, I did not get paid while I was doing that. So on top of student teaching, I had to work 2 jobs to just pay off my tuition and rent on top of student loans. So I think this is a really viable option that we need to be talking to our young people about. So thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. I want to follow up with one comment that both Mr. Lucy made and that you did about the local aspect. And I'm reminded we're currently in Lancaster in the middle of replacing some gas pipelines down the street. And the one street is now in year 2 of replacing gas pipelines. And the constituents are pretty upset because the condition of the road is pretty horrible. They're, of course, going after UGI, who is the gas company, but the pipeline company is not a local company. And quite frankly, I tend to blame the pipeline company a little more than I do UGI in that these guys just don't seem to care.
Okay.
They don't live in that community. They're going to leave that community when they're done, and they don't care what happens to the people in between. And that I think is probably one of the biggest aspects of using local labor is that you take pride in your own communities. You know that you're going to have to see your neighbor again next week and next year, and that you don't just get to drive away and say, so what if I disrupted your life for a couple years, Too bad.
I'm going to tell you, on union pipelines, our union contractors that come and they travel throughout the country doing it's considered a specialty job. However, our union contractors that we deal with, some of them will come in with travelmen or travel journeymen, as we call them. However, in our agreements, they have to have at least 50% of local participation on those pipelines. So many of the pipelines that we're involved in now in a Delaware County, Chester County area, we're upwards to 65% of local participation. And that's one of the problems that we have had with energy transfer. You have to get out in the community and let folks know that. You have to have local people involved in these projects, whether it's from the PR firm or the engineering firm. Your local people care about the community. That's my mother's house. That's my aunt's house. That's my house. These are the folks I grew up with. It's my teachers live here. So we as local tradesmen certainly have passion and compassion, which is very important for the areas that we work in. We take pride in the work that we do. As Tony said, I do it myself, as you said your father did. I got into the union in 1991 and graduated from St. James High School on a Saturday, went to work Monday. And the first job I was on the Blue Route right here on 476. And I still take pride into it. And that is one of the things that we certainly preach to our members when we're working in any area, whether we're from the area or we aren't. Someone lives in an area, you wouldn't want them to come in your backyard, treating you like that, talking to you like that, leaving your front yard in disarray or the street coming into your house in disarray. So we cannot do that when we go out in these other areas.
All right, I think that wraps it up. Thank you very much. Do you have any closing remarks,
Thank you
Representative
for your
O'Mara?
time.
I just want to thank all of our panelists today and all of the residents who came out to participate. I've been busy writing my to-do list and follow-up, so I'm going to take what we heard today and start to work with both PennDOT and Radnor Township and all of the different stakeholders to make sure we're making improvements that work for everyone. So thank you all for being here today, and thank you to my colleagues for joining me.
Thank you. Representative Bradford?
If I could, and I apologize because they were fine closing remarks, I must say you're very effective because I was late getting here, but I was driving down the Blue Route, and I got to give PennDOT credit. They were cleaning up litter driving down the Blue Route this morning. So thank you.
Thanks. That will conclude our hearing today. Thank you.